Hi everyone. Today we're going to start our first unit of AP Psychology, History and Approaches. For our first lesson, we are going to, the objective for today is that you will be able to explain how psychology developed as an empirical science by taking notes and participating in Which Famous Psychologist Am I activity. The essential question for today is when and how did modern psychological science begin? When we first started to study psychology, it wasn't necessarily a science. It was a pre-scientific thought or discussion, or even maybe philosophical. Some of the first thoughts behind psychology were the philosopher Plato, who believed that the mind and the body were separate. Descartes took that thought and moved on to discover what we now know to be nerves by dissecting animals. He believed that there were hollow tunnels through our body that sent messages. We now know that those hollow tunnels are not necessarily hollow, but instead full of nerve endings, and that's what sends messages throughout our body. And then Francis Bacon, who influenced the ideas behind the scientific method by his ideas on novum organum, which believes that there is more to understanding than what we may see. So just because we see something or something appears one way doesn't mean that we understand all of it. Locke took these ideas. John Locke, he was a philosopher as well, but he believed in what we call empiricism knowledge. And this is the idea that originates in experiences, and science should rely on observation and experimentation. So these kind of the first thoughts behind testing and observing behaviors. And that moved us right into the scientific study of psychology with Wilhelm Wundt. He was known as the father of psychology because he was the one that established the first psychological lab and therefore turned psychology into a science. So instead of just observing or just kind of talking about behaviors, he really tested it out to get a better understanding of psychology. Structuralism was one of the first schools of thought behind psychology, so trying to figure out behaviors and understand why behaviors exist. And Titchener was a psychologist who believed in introspection, and this is this idea of self-reflective and becoming more aware of your experiences. So an example would be if you smell a rose, you might say the rose is a smooth petaled and sweetly aromatic. So becoming more aware. You guys are going to do a quick introspection activity. I gave each of you a mint at the beginning of class. What I want you to do is to practice the art of introspection by trying to become more aware of your own perceptions. So I want you to go ahead and unwrap the mint and place it on your tongue. I don't want you to bite it. I don't want you to chew it. Now I want you to describe on your paper the elemental sensations. So essentially take your time and really think about the mint and how it tastes, how does it make you feel, is there a smell associated with it, and write those down in the space provided in your worksheet. So hopefully the mint allowed you to be more self-reflective and more aware of your experiences of eating the mint, and that's an idea of introspection. The next school of thought was functionalism, and that's William James and Mary Whiton Calkins. Mary Whiton Calkins actually ended up becoming the first female president of the American Psychological Association. And they focused on how our mental and behavioral processes function and how they enable us to adapt, survive, and flourish. So think about like how we change and how people go through different experiences. You have people in war-torn countries. How do you adapt to that and still flourish? So it's a little bit more than just this being self-reflective and aware of what's happening to you, but adapting to what's happening to you. The third school of thought is Gestalt. And this is by Max Wertheimer. And he believed in order to understand experiences, one must look at the whole. So there's a really good graphic that I think does a better job of explaining this than I can that we're going to take a look at. So if you take a look at this graphic, you'll see that it's made up of entirely broken circles, right? So if you just look at the circle part of it, all of them are broken circles. That's all they are. However, if you were a Gestalt psychologist, you would say that your perception has a powerful tendency to form meaningful patterns. And because of that, you will see a triangle in this design. Even though that triangle is only an illusion, right? The triangle isn't actually drawn here. All that's drawn are broken circles. But because of the way the broken circles are drawn and because of the way that we perceive things, we tend to see a triangle here. So it's this whole perceptual experience exceeds the sum of its parts. So the triangle is what sticks out to us, not the broken circles. I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know and we'll go over it some more. No, sorry. And that takes us on to, now that psychology has been fully created as a science, it takes us on to this next idea of psychology's big issue. In this nature versus nurture debate, what creates our behavior? Is it the genetics that we are born with, or is it the environment, the nature that we are, or the nurture that we are in? And the nature-nurture debate came up because of Charles Darwin and this idea of natural selection, survival of the fittest. He studied these tortoises, and what he realized is that when he traveled from place to place, the tortoises were different. Even though they were all tortoises, they all had different adaptations. So genetically, nature, they were a tortoise. Nurture, though, they had to develop because of the surroundings around them were different. And so because of this big question, it led us to the three main levels of analysis for psychology. The first is this idea of biological influences. And this is the idea of genetics, right? So our hormones, the brain mechanisms, the genetics that you're born with, that is all the biological aspects of it, and that creates a behavior or a mental process. In addition to that, you also have social cultural influences, the presence of others, cultural, society, and family expectations, peer and other group influences. So naturally, biologically, we know that jumping from something high is probably not a good idea for survival. Social cultural, however, may be persuasion from friends of ours to go ahead and go skydiving or jumping off, something very large and tall that I would never in a million years do. But that's your social cultural influences. And then the third level of analysis is psychological influences. And this is learned fears and other learned expectations, emotional responses, or cognitive processing. So this might be something like, I'm afraid of an airplane, right? Has anything bad ever happened to me on an airplane? Nope. But is it a little bit scary when that turbulence happens? Definitely. That's psychological, right? There's no reason for that. There's no biological reason for that fear. There's no social cultural reason for that fear. It is all an emotional or psychological response for my behavior and my fear. And that is it for lesson 1.